serve their community. Congresswoman Shontel Brown, who I think has been here for years now, but she really has hit the ground running in her presence on this floor. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to the co-leaders, Barbara Lee and Sheila Jackson Lee, my sisters and colleagues. Madam Speaker, as we celebrate Black History Month, I rise today to join my CBC colleagues and my CBC sisters in honoring the life and trailblazing legacy of Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm. Before me, it was her. Before my predecessor, HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge, it was her. Before the record-setting number of 27 Black women in Congress today, it was her. My career in public service rests on the shoulders and the contributions of the iconic Shirley Chisholm. In 1969, she became a political pioneer and shattered racial and gender barriers by becoming the first Black woman elected to Congress. Her signature slogan, "Unbought and unbossed," spoke to her audacity, her sheer sense of will, and her fearlessness in the face of established norms and institutions. And it spoke to her rise as the people's politician, someone willing to speak up and speak out for those embattled by poverty, discrimination, and injustice. In Congress, she fought for low-income families, for hungry school children, and for single moms. She was critical to the creation of the National School Lunch Program. She was critical to the growth of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP. And she was critical to the creation of the Women's, Infants, and Children Program, known as WIC. Then, as now, these programs reduce the hunger facing American children and families. And today, I am proud to carry forth her legacy by fighting for their expansion. 50 years ago, Shirley Chisholm made history once again by becoming the first African American and the first woman to run for president. But more than being a mere political first, Shirley Chisholm is best remembered for her grit, her willingness to push on the pedal of progress, and her ability to not just see America for what it is, but for what it could be. Chisholm understood the challenges women, particularly Black women, were facing in America, and she created a path for women like me. She passed the baton, and now it's up to us to continue the race. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Let me thank you, Congresswoman Brown, for that statement and for your presentation and laying out many of Shirley Chisholm's accomplishments. I mean, she was a great legislator. She passed the 1974 minimum wage law, which expanded minimum wage standards to domestic workers and a broader swath of government employees. And so I'm glad that you laid that out, because so many of us and so many, especially younger African-American women and women of color, see her as this icon who ran for president, first Black woman elected, but she was an excellent legislator, and she used her contacts and leverage, and she knew how to leverage the folks, as I mentioned, George Wallace's people, she understood her power. And so thank you, and you understand your power, and I'm so glad that you're here tonight for this presentation. Thank you again. I will, let me just ask now for unanimous consent to insert into the record the statement of our newest member of the Congressional Black Caucus and our newest woman, Congresswoman Sheila McCormick.
Covered by general leave.
Thank you. We'll enter into the record. I will now yield to my colleague, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, for some more words, and we'll keep going.
Congresswoman, thank you so very much. And I wanted to offer my appreciation first to you, because I want you to be the last word on this floor tonight, because I truly mean what I said earlier, and that is that you have, in almost in every moment, there's been an anecdotal story, a very important one, that you've reminded of the strength of Shirley Chisholm. And I do want to go back to Shirley's Caribbean roots, but her strong roots in Brooklyn. And I know that you said this, or I'm sure it has been referred to, or you will, is that when she came to the United States Congress, being the first African-American woman and being dismissed, not by her constituents, but by the hierarchy that was here. And I'm sure someone with a little chuckle, Brooklyn, urban, and guess where we'll put her? On the Agricultural Committee. And that will get her packing up and running out. But Shirley Chisholm, again, fighting Shirley Chisholm was her theme, showed them. And I remember those words either said by her or described by her, a tree grows in Brooklyn. Don't sell us short. A tree goes in Queens, a tree grows in Manhattan, a tree grows in New York. And she did take to the leadership of the Agricultural Committee, particularly becoming an expert on SNAP and many other aspects of agriculture that really dealt with the vulnerable and starving people in America. That was Shirley Chisholm. And then as I intertwined the question of the selection and nomination of an African-American woman to the United States Congress, to the United States Supreme Court, I want to put in the record the words, if you are always ruled but denied the opportunity to rule in turn, you're simply a subject and not fully a citizen. And so Congresswoman Chisholm's presence was to deny being only ruled and simply being a subject. And the cases that spoke to that are the Supreme Court decisions like Dred Scott versus Sanford, Plessy versus Ferguson, Karamintu versus United States, civil rights cases in 1883, Bowles versus Hardwick, and Lochner versus New York, and Buck versus Bell. These cases from 1857 to 1927 all showed where America was in terms of this cancer called racism. And so I want to refer us tonight, in my final words on the floor, in tribute to Shirley Chisholm, is the words she said about do women dare. And as I do so with a little bit of sense of great honor, is to show a picture of myself and Shirley Chisholm that I've now found and relocated and will actually get framed, my presenting her with an award after a speech that she gave in front of the black women lawyers when we were few, unknown and unlisted and probably unappreciated. She actually came to speak before the black women lawyers in Houston, Texas, having some years before that worked as an intern in her district at one of the state reps' offices, Representative Bellamy. And I might say, as I talk about Shirley, I have to put on the record that she was selected for the Agriculture Committee, but I'm told by my former colleague, Pat Schroeder, that when she and Ron Dellums went to the Armed Services Committee, they were given one chair, and they had to sit in one chair. Because they were trying to diminish them and dismiss them, they could not do that. And though this is not about Ron Dellums, he became the chair of the Armed Services Committee. But let me give these words in conclusion on the fighting Shirley Chisholm. This is her speech, Do Women Dare? And it's just been discovered. The topic this morning, of course, is Do Women Dare? These are her words. And I have said of course women dare. Do women dare? I assume that the question implies, do women dare take an active part in society, and in particular, do they dare to take a part in the present social revolution? We need this now more than ever. And I would say, do Americans dare? Do men and women dare? Do African Americans dare? Do vulnerable people dare? And I find the question as much of an insult as I would the question, are you as a black person willing to fight for your rights? America has been sufficiently sensitized to the answer whether or not black people are willing to both fight and die for their rights. To make the question itself is asinine. America is not yet sufficiently aware, but such a question applied to women is equally asinine. And so she goes on to say, I am, as is obvious, both black and a woman, And that is a good vantage point from which to view at least two elements of what is becoming a social revolution, the American Black Revolution and the women's liberation movement. But it is also a horrible disadvantage. It is a disadvantage, my friends, because America as a nation is both racist and anti-feminist. Racism and anti-feminism are two of the prime traditions of this country that we have to face objectively. For any individual, therefore, challenging social traditions is a giant step. A giant step because there are no social traditions which do not have corresponding social sanctions, the sole purpose of which are to protect the sanctity of the traditions. And so she goes on to talk about, do women dare? I cannot think of more important words in 2022 as we fight against racism and sexism, as we fight to give a sense of reality and honesty and equality to the idea of a black woman going to the Supreme Court. And as we raise up the issue of the study of slavery and the development of reparation proposals under H.R. 40, can that be a simple, obvious reality? Can that be something that is just accepted because it is right? Shirley Chisholm has taught us to keep fighting and to dare. With that, I thank you to the gentlelady for bringing us to this place and also to this understanding. And with that, I yield to my co-anchor, the Honorable Barbara Jordan.
That's okay.
Yes, I love it. Now named Barbara Lee. That's a good one. I yield back to her. Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan, Barbara Lee, all good names. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and thank you so much for your reminding us of her history here in the Capitol as a member of the Ag Committee. Now, you know that I worked for our beloved, the late Ron Dellums, starting in 1975, and I worked for him for 11 years. I got a chance to be with Congresswoman Chisholm many, many times, also with Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. So I got a chance to know her and her brilliance and her stately demeanor and her huge intellect. And I remember very clearly that Congresswoman Chisholm also was on the Rules Committee. And I know she was the only the second woman to ever be appointed to the Rules Committee. I mean, that's since, again, I have to go back to 1789 because I want the public to understand the centuries that took place during the interim. First, the second woman on the Rules Committee, since 1789. And I believe, and we're checking, I think that she may have been the first member of the CBC on the Rules Committee also. But also she, in terms of just her history and bringing it current, she was an original member, board member, first honorary co-president in 1969 of the National Abortion Rights Action League, better known as NARAL. And she was a fierce advocate for women's reproductive rights and justice. And she was also only one of 16 black women who courageously led a movement for reproductive freedom that began with the publishing of the very seminal brochure, We Remember, African American Women for Reproductive Freedom, and that was in 1989. And so she has been honored in so many different ways throughout the years, but we need to do more. We're going to start with our Chisholm Trail. For those who want to join us for this year, we're going to commemorate the Chisholm Trail. I was so pleased that Chairwoman Beatty mentioned our Shirley Chisholm stamp. It took us a long time to do this, but it was a bipartisan effort. We finally have a forever Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm's historical stamp from the Postal Service. Also, she posthumously was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Barack Obama. Her official portrait, I want to thank Speaker Nancy Pelosi because that was one of her first efforts, working with us. And you remember Congresswoman Juanita Miller McDonald, another African-American woman, brilliant woman from Southern California who passed away. She was chairing the House Administration Committee, and we got together. And this wasn't easy, and I want to thank Speaker Pelosi for helping us because it was a heavy lift to get this beautiful portrait painted by a young brother down in Southern California into this temple of democracy. And at first there were those who wanted it the portrait to be hidden in some little corner. Well, Speaker Pelosi and Lorraine, I'll never forget, clerk of the House, made sure that she was placed in a prominent place so that people, especially young people, could get a chance to know her and to love her, because what she did for this country was so amazing for everyone, for the voiceless, and she was a person, a woman, a black woman who loved to bring people together from all backgrounds. So there's so many other memorials across the country to remember her fortitude and to honor her grit and tenacity. And she taught me once again, and I know Congresswoman Jackson Lee knows this, that black women can't go along to get along. Again, 1789. These rules weren't made for us. So we must change these rules of the game so that we must address gender and racial equity at its core. Before Congresswoman Chisholm passed away, she was asked how she wanted to be remembered. And I remember she said, "I want history to remember me not just as the first black woman to be elected to Congress, not as the first black woman to have made a bid for the presidency of the United States, but as a black woman who lived in the 20th century and dared to be herself. I want to be remembered as a catalyst for change in America." And so I can confidently say that that is her legacy. Well done, Mrs. C. Well done. Her staff, and many of us called her Mrs. C. She had a phenomenal staff. Carolyn Smith, she had an African-American woman as her chief of staff. She was one of the few, like Ron Dellums, who had senior staff members who were black women, probably about three of us on the Hill at that point. And so she lived a life that we can all be proud of, and how she paved the way for so many of us to be here as members of Congress, but also throughout the country as members of elected bodies and corporate boardrooms. She made sure that she left her legacy so that, yes, someone said earlier that we finally have the first African-American vice president in the country, because of Shirley Chisholm, I am. Because of Shirley Chisholm, Kamala Harris is. So let me ask for unanimous consent again to include all of the extraneous material into the record and keep the record open for 5 days. And I want to take a moment
Without
to
objection.
thank our staff. Can we do that? Okay.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I want to thank Rico, where are you, Rico Doss, and Kayla Williams on my staff for really pulling this all together and helping us with all of this. Sheila, your staff, and the Congressional Black Caucus member staff, because without our staff, as I know, because I was a staffer for many years, none of this would have happened tonight. So thank you guys very much. Thank you, and I yield the balance of our time.
Gentlelady yields back.